Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingston, Texas, USA, with another episode of Judaism and Christianity at Contrast. I still can't get used to saying that. Judaism and Christianity at Contrast by Rabbi Stuart Federow. Tonight we'll be discussing Chapter 5 of his book, Jewish Law. Rabbi, welcome back. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Always good to be here with you.
And because we've been missing it for so long, a quick finger dance would be nice. There you go, folks. You asked for it. You got it. All right. Okay, good deal. So here we are. So thank you all for being patient with us. Sir. Yes, sir.
Before we move on.
Yes, sir.
Your video, Learn How to Read Hebrew in 1 Hour, Hebrew Jumpstart, has almost 5,000 views.
Oh, very nice.
Isn't that cool, huh?
That's very good to hear. Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
That's very good
Thought
to hear.
you'd like to know that.
Yep. In fact, you should be able to find that. I'm trying to figure out why my lower thirds is missing a name. Oh, there it goes. It shows up now. That's great. Yeah. So every once in a while it gets mentioned. The video gets mentioned by either Rabbi Federow, Rabbi Singer, or something. And when they do, and like tonight, since we just mentioned it again, I'll put it in the video description area below, so that you can actually have direct access to that particular show. It's really great teaching things. So let me refresh my YouTube page. Okay, good deal. Okay, so we're on Chapter 5, Jewish Law.
Yes.
Is this going to be a two-part thing?
I don't know. It's very long.
Okay.
You know, it's the 20-page chapter in the book.
Well, let's keep it an hour, and then if
fine,
we
wherever we stop, we stop.
Very good. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to you and let you rock. I'll be listening in and asking questions if I need them.
Boring, because all I'm doing is talking instead of having a conversation.
Well, your teaching is not just talking.
I know.
So it's going to be something very valuable to everybody. So
I can only hope.
Of course.
But they should buy the book and not rely on the videos.
That's very true. Very true. So, and the book link you'll find it right there on the screen. Go to whatjewsbelieve.org. That's the best place to find it. You can also find it on Amazon. And you can
find it through your.
Oh yeah, on the link. I forgot. Yeah, there's the link. That's right. There's the link.
That's the link you should put up.
Gotcha. That link is already in the video description area. Just go down and look for. In fact, I'll tell you what line it is. Give me just a second. It's line 3. Line 3 and 4 are both there, in Spanish and English. They're all numbered in the video description area with all these books and stuff. You'll see you've got all these books and titles and stuff. Just click on that. If you use that link, I'll get a few cents off of each sale, so that works. And it all adds up, so very good.
Right.
Okay, Rabbi, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Chapter 5, Jewish Law. And it's a contrast, of course, Judaism and Christianity, a contrast between the Jewish view of Jewish law and the Christian view of Jewish law. And why do I say the Jewish view of Jewish law and the Christian view of Jewish law? It's because you have to understand that when anything in the Christian New Testament talks about the law they're talking about is Judaism's laws. It's not an issue about Rome's laws or Turkey or Japan or wherever. The issue that the New Testament is dealing with is how they respond to Jewish law, because they erroneously think that they came from Judaism. So when they talk about the law, they're talking about what law is there? Okay, there's the laws of the Torah. There's the laws derived from statements made in the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures. Okay, which at the time were being canonized, put together. Okay, Jesus also makes references in the Christian's New Testament to what would be the earliest laws produced by the Pharisees. And the Pharisees became the rabbis, so they're really also making comments about rabbinic law. Okay, that's it. Those are the laws that they would have been talking about. Now, regardless of what a person happens to think about the Pharisaic law, the rabbinic law, surely they believe that the laws of the Torah are God-given. And if they're God-given, their criticism of the law becomes a criticism of God. Okay. Now, obviously, you know that the majority of books found in the Christian's New Testament were written by Paul, and the way the New Testament portrays Paul's view of law, which is Jewish law, is far different than the view of Jesus's view of Jewish law, of the law. So, if you take a look at Matthew, chapter 5, verse 17 to 20, Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 to 20. Jesus actually sounds rather positive towards the law. Think not that I have come to destroy the law of the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass from the law, till everything be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore breaks one of these least commandments and teaches others to do so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do them and teach them, that same person shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you that except your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is respecting Jewish law. He's respecting the laws of God. He's respecting the laws of the Pharisees. And by the way, even says, okay, to the multitudes and to his disciples, this is Matthew 23, verse 1 to 3, Matthew 23, 1 to 3, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that you observe and do, but do not go after their works, for they say and do not. So what they teach you're supposed to do, according to Christian theology, according to Jesus, in their own New Testament. By saying that the Pharisees and the scribes sit in Moses' seat, Jesus is saying that they hold the same authority as Moses, and therefore should be obeyed. Okay? Jesus' objection was not against the laws of the Pharisees, but rather it was against the fact that the Pharisees themselves did not obey them. Jesus was actually attacking their supposed hypocrisy and not their laws. He was actually directing his followers to obey what became rabbinic law. Because at the time, the vast majority of people involved in his Christianity and his followers were Jews. Paul had a very negative view, on the other hand, of Jewish law, and it's the views of Paul, of course, that became prevalent in Christianity rather than Jesus' view of Jewish law. On the other hand, when the majority of people who were Christians, were non-Jews, never were Jews, non-Jews were never commanded by God to follow God's laws in the Torah. And God spoke to Moses and said, speak to everybody on earth? No. God spoke to Moses and said, speak to the children of Israel and tell them, command them to do whatever.
Rabbi, can I read you something?
Yeah.
Based on what you just said, Matthew 5:17, I got an email from somebody today, and it was regarding one of my last shows, either with you or with Greg McBride, I couldn't remember, but it specifically referenced Matthew 5:17.
Okay.
And it says, he said, back when I was still a follower of Jesus, we did a study on that was from Dwight A. Pryor called Behold the Man. In one of the episodes, he mentioned that if you take Matthew 5:17, the complete Jewish Bible, and translate it back to from Greek to Hebrew, then the translation that Hebrew into English, the word Jesus uses is not fulfill the law, but it's actually says more like preserve the law. So suggesting that very well could have been a mild mistranslation, and obviously could have made a world of difference if they said preserve instead of fulfill.
See, I don't think it would have made any difference, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
Even if Jesus used the term fulfill the law, he was never going to say, well, if one person fulfills the law, nobody ever has to do it ever again.
Right.
When Jesus said this, what he was basically trying to say is, I don't come to destroy it, I'm going to follow it. That's really what he was talking about. But Christianity has to validate their concept that they don't have to keep the law. Well, they don't because they're not Jews. Okay? And after the earliest Jewish followers of Jesus were labeled a heresy called the Ebionites, and that's a whole lecture in itself, everybody in the Christian world were never Jews, had no ancestry that was Jewish. Okay, but he's speaking to the Jewish people, and he's not telling them that my coming ends the law. He's saying that I'm here to keep the law, and you should too.
Right.
That's why he says, those who teach men to keep the law will be called great in the kingdom of heaven, right. Which is Matthew 5:17 to 20.
So here's an interesting thing too on the same concept that the actual complete Jewish Bible does not say fulfill. It actually uses the word complete. Now, granted, like you said, it implies the same thing to all Christians, but if you look at the idea of completing something, it puts off a different feel. Instead of saying I did it, you don't have to. It says I did it, so you can too. I just proved to you that it can be completed. I did all of it. I did everything like you're supposed to, which means it's not too far from you to reach. So, but like you said, it is a Christian agenda, which it doesn't matter. They're going to believe what they want.
And whatever they believe, whatever they want to believe, is still going to be wrong on all sorts of different levels.
Sure.
They were never commanded to keep Jewish law because they're not Jews. Okay. And when they smatter all of Jewish law, at minimum, they are including God's laws. So they're saying that God's laws are now defunct. Right. When God explicitly said that the covenant between God and the Jews, which means the Jews are supposed to keep the Jewish law that God gave them as part of that covenant, are eternal.
Right. Okay.
So,
now, a funny thing I just saw. You said it was wrong on so many different levels.
yeah.
What's our show without having a little bit of humor in it? Let me just show you the image that came up. I'm going to drag it over your image here. You can't see it. You'll see it on YouTube here in a few minutes. It's an Asian man. His name is Wong, and there's a bunch of books. And the book title is called Level 1, Level 2, Level.
This is Wong on so many levels. That's funny.
Anyway, all right. I'll shut up now.
That's funny.
Okay.
All right. So I guess I should continue.
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. All right. Because of Paul's misrepresentation, because of Christianity and the way they had to go, otherwise they would think that they had to keep Jewish law. For all sorts of different reasons, there are numerous misunderstandings that we are going to be discussing in this chapter of my book. Some of Christianity's misunderstandings of Jewish law are the following. Number one, that Jewish laws are only about rituals. Oh, Judaism is such a ritualistic and legalistic code, and it's all laws and it's all about ritual. No, it's not. Number two, that Jews added more and more laws to the Bible that are unnecessary and that are not therefore divine. Number three, that the purpose of Jewish law is to condemn those who don't obey them. That's purely Paul. Number four, that Jews keep Jewish law in order to be justified. What does justified mean? That you remove the guilt so that you can go to heaven. Number five, that the Jewish laws are too many for one person to obey and that no one person can obey every law. Number six, that to break any one Jewish law is the same as breaking any other law, and therefore to break one law is as if you've broken all the laws. Number seven, that the observance of or obedience to Jewish law must be an all or nothing proposition. Number eight, that Jewish laws become obsolete if one person can perfectly obey them or fulfill them, then they're obsolete. And number nine, which we somewhat discussed in other contexts, that by punishing one person, another person's guilt for the sins that other person committed can be removed. So these are 8 misconceptions that Christianity has about Jewish law, and we're going to talk about them for as much time as we have this week and probably next week. Okay, the stereotype of Jewish law is that they're all about minute rituals that one has to do on a daily basis, and it's just not true. If you know, actually pick up the Bible for a change and actually read it, you'd find something very interesting. Jewish laws were created for the same kinds of things that any neighborhood or city or county or state or country would create laws for, and for the same reasons. If my dog is running across your lawn and falls into a hole in your yard that you had dug for whatever reason, and my dog breaks my dog's legs, what happens? Who's responsible? Is this a law that is ritualistic? No. Countering the myth that Jewish laws are only about rituals, the same law is found in the Torah in Exodus 21:33 to 34. Exodus 21:33 to 34. And if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and a donkey or ox falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good and give money to the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. That's called the laws of tort. That's lawsuits. has nothing to do with ritual, and yet it's a biblical law in the Torah in Exodus 21:33 and following. Another issue. If you're going to build a house, there are laws called building codes that govern how your house must be constructed and how the safety of those who live in it and live near it are to be ensured by its construction. Take a look at the Bible in Deuteronomy 22, verse 8. Deuteronomy 22:8. When you build a new house, then you shall make a battlement for the roof, that you do not bring blood upon your house if any man falls from it. Building code. If you're going to build a roof and on top of the roof, people are going to have parties or whatever, then you have to build a fence around the edge of the roof so nobody falls off. It's a building code. So that's not ritual either. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't Jewish laws I'm not saying that there aren't Jewish laws that regard Jewish rituals. Okay? But in the United States, there are laws, believe it or not, that govern how you display the United States flag or how you're supposed to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, which, by the way, are rituals. So understand that Jewish law also governs areas that have nothing to do with ritual. As a matter of fact, most people would characterize these laws as civil laws, but they are part of our Jewish religious laws. Jewish laws, no differently than any other nation's laws, cover the exact same subjects, the exact same rituals, the exact same things like laws of lawsuit or liability, building codes, etc. The difference is that for we Jews, these laws are derived from the same God-given biblical values that are also considered God-given. God commanded us. It's part of the laws. Number two, Christians believe that the Jews added more and more laws to the Bible that are unnecessary and that are therefore not divine. Let me ask you a question. Where exactly in the United States Constitution does it say that you must drive a car at the speed of 20 miles per hour in a school zone? Where in the U.S. Constitution does it say a car has a speed limit of 20 miles in a school zone? Of course, the United States Constitution does not contain any laws that pertain to automobiles because automobiles hadn't been invented at the time of the Constitution. When the car was invented, new laws in keeping with the values found in the U.S. Constitution had to be created to cover the new situations created by the new invention. That's why not every single law of the United States are going to be found in the U.S. Constitution. New laws had to be created to cover new situations, new circumstances, not even dreamed of when the Constitution was written. And that explains why not all Jewish laws are going to be found in the Bible either. Judaism also had to come up with new laws that had to be in keeping with the divine values and ethics of the Bible for the new inventions and the new situations developed after the biblical period. That's why there's rabbinic law. American life today is not defined solely by the laws of the Constitution, but American life today is also defined by the laws created by Congress over the last 200 plus years, as well as by the various court cases and other precedents and local state courts. And Judaism is not just a religion of the Bible, but rather Judaism is a religion of the rabbinic interpretation of the Bible. Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people who got their start in the Bible, in biblical period. So there are verses in the Bible that you can't take literally, you have to interpret them because the Bible gives no indication regarding how they're supposed to be carried out. And there's a real obvious example that's seen from the biblical law of placing the mezuzah on the doorposts of your home. Take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 9, Deuteronomy 6:9. It says, "And you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates." What is them? You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your... What's them? The Bible never tells us what we're supposed to write there. It doesn't indicate how or where the commandments should place, where the commandment to put the mezuzah up, it doesn't say how it's supposed to be placed on the doorpost or where on the doorpost. In order to be carried out, you have to interpret. Simple example shows the need for an oral law and the interpretations of the rabbis. And this is no different than Christianity, which is not the religion of the New Testament. Just like Judaism is not the religion of the Hebrew Scriptures, it's the religion of the interpretation of the Hebrew Scriptures by the rabbis over the last 2,000 plus years, 2,200 years, give or take. Okay? How does Christianity baptize somebody? And when they baptize somebody, can they show how Christianity is a result of the interpretation? You can see how Christianity is a result of the interpretation of the New Testament rather than the religion of the New Testament. Christians are divided as to what age you are to be baptized and the way in which a person is to be baptized. Roman Catholics will baptize a baby at birth. Most Protestant denominations will only baptize a person when he or she is old enough to understand what it means to be baptized and who understands what it means to accept Jesus as his or her personal Savior. Roman Catholic priests will baptize an infant by sprinkling water on the baby's forehead, while many Protestant denominations will only baptize by fully immersing the person in water. These differences in how and when one is to be baptized is a result of different interpretations of the New Testament by the various denominations and their leaders and their history. The Christian New Testament isn't clear how or what age a person is to be baptized. At one point in Acts chapter 16, verse 31, Acts chapter 16, 31, Jesus tells a man that if he believes, he and his whole house are going to be saved. Acts 16:31, and they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you shall be saved, and your household. One could possibly interpret that to mean that the entire household would be ready to be baptized if only the father accepts Christianity, and that could include infant children. And that interpretation could justify the baptism of infants whose parents or whose parent accepted Jesus. New Testament is also unclear as to how you do a baptism. Baptism as a Christian ritual is derived from the story in Matthew where Jesus himself gets baptized by John the Baptist. Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. Matthew 3:16. And Jesus, when he was baptized, went up straightway out of the water. That's all it says. When he was baptized, he went up straightway out of the water. All the text says is he went out of the water. I could be in a bathtub that's only 1.5 inches, 2 inches filled, and if I came out of the bathtub, you could say I came out of the water. It doesn't have to be fully submerged. Doesn't mean the whole body was completely submerged. A ladle can be dipped in the water, but only the bowl of the ladle is placed in the water, not the whole ladle, or else your hand holding on to the handle of the ladle would also be in the water. Neither the handle nor the hand holding the handle is ever completely submerged. The text of the New Testament isn't clear on how to do a baptism and at what age a person is to be baptized. So those Christian denominations that interpret this verse from Matthew 3:16 to mean that Jesus was completely immersed in water will baptize by completely immersing the person in water. But those Christian denominations that interpret the same verse to mean that Jesus was not fully immersed will not demand a full immersion in water for their baptisms. The way in which the various denominations of Christianity interpret the verses and incorporated their interpretations into their rituals is no different than the way in which the rabbis interpreted verses from the Hebrew scriptures and then incorporated their rabbinic interpretations into the Jewish rituals. The Talmud, the oral law, is made up of the interpretations of the rabbis. Like the Talmud in this regard, the interpretations made by the early Christians of their New Testament verses, which were applied to new situations and to solve new problems, is their Christian oral tradition, their oral law. The Jews did not merely add more and more laws to the already existing biblical laws. They were faced with new situations, new experiences, and had to apply the divine biblical laws with its divine biblical values and ethics to those new situations in order to continue to do the will of God. And that's why Jewish laws are considered to be God-given, regardless of whether or not they are found in the Bible, the Talmud, or later Jewish literature. Okay. Number 3, the purpose of Jewish law is to condemn those who won't obey them. Paul again. In the Christian New Testament seems to hold a very negative view of Jewish law in contrast to what we said earlier about Jesus' view of Jewish law. The laws given by God to the Jewish people through Moses on Mount Sinai, as well as the laws given to the Jewish people afterwards, Paul writes that these laws were given by God to teach the Jews only that they are sinners, and only that they are incapable of keeping those laws, in order to further teach them that they would eventually need the saving death of Jesus on the cross to remove them from their guilt from not being able to keep the laws. The purpose of these God-given laws, according to Paul and according to Christianity, is to teach us that what we do is wrong, making us sinners, so that we can understand our guilt that only Jesus can remove. Paul writes, this is Romans chapter 3, 19 to 24. Romans 3, 19 to 24. Now we know that what things soever the law says, It says to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. Paul writes further in Galatians 3:10-13 that the law is a curse because its function is to teach the people that since they can't keep the law, they are cursed by the law. Since Jesus came, the law is no longer binding on those who believe in Jesus, and therefore his followers are no longer condemned or cursed by the law. All those who accept Jesus are forgiven of their sins, and the law no longer curses them, since being Christians, they're no longer obligated to keep the laws. Galatians chapter 3:10-13. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse, for it is written, cursed is everyone that continues not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. But that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident. For the just shall live by faith. And the law is not of faith, but the man that does them shall live in them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. This is such a weird paragraph. It makes me think sometimes that Paul was under the influence of drugs when he wrote. So Jesus was hung on a tree, the cross. Therefore, he is cursed, because cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. It's a biblical reference. Okay, so by becoming a curse, how do you become a curse? Can I become an exclamation? How does a person become a curse? Okay, so by becoming a curse, Jesus took away our curse of the law. Okay. Another example can be seen a few verses later in Galatians 3:23-25, where Paul writes that God's laws were like a schoolmaster, teaching those who were given the law, namely the Jews, that they were sinners. However, once faith in Jesus took away the sins that the inevitable disobedience to the law would bring, meaning that one no longer needed the law, they didn't need the schoolmaster. Galatians 3:23-25, but before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. Paul taught that the reason why God gave the law was to make all individuals aware of the fact that they're sinners, since they were not capable, he thought, of keeping the law perfectly. As a result of learning from the law that they were sinners, people would then understand that they needed their Jesus to die for their sins and remove from them their sinful, guilt-ridden state. So God gives a law that God knew no one would be able to keep, and then condemns everybody for not keeping the law that God knew we wouldn't be able to keep when he invented us, when he brought us into creation. Obviously not. Is our God so cruel that he would bring a person into existence, give him or her a set of laws that they were not capable of obeying, and then condemn them for an eternity of torture for not keeping the law that God gave? That's a God of cruelty. God isn't cruel. If God is the all-merciful, if God is compassionate, if God is forgiving and kind, why would God do such a thing? And why would anybody think that God would do that? So what's the reason for Jewish laws? God, who is merciful and compassionate and forgiving and kind, gave laws to the Jews for the exact same reason that a loving father gives his children laws. God knew that the children will have a better life than they would have without the laws. Parents who love their child don't say to their child, I love you, now do whatever you want. Parents who love their children lay down guidelines for their children, and they do so because they love them and want the best for them. A life lived with no discipline, with no guidelines, no laws by which to live, is going to be a life of selfishness and cruelty to others. Furthermore, when a parent gives the child such laws, the parent does not want the child to obey because it pleases the parent, but rather because the laws are for the benefit of the child. Don't tell me I need to know how to please God. God gives us these laws because it's better for us, not because it'll please God if we obey them. God wants us to obey them, but for our benefit, not God's. To understand how law works in Judaism, I always use the analogy of driving a car, which some of you probably already heard already. The analogy of Jewish law to the laws of driving a car help us understand many aspects of Jewish law and really law in general. So come on, does anybody really want to live in a city that has no laws to govern the way in which we drive? Does anyone truly want to drive in a city that has no traffic laws, no speed laws, no laws of right-of-way, no laws at all that govern our driving? Truthfully, the laws created by the city and state help us drive safer. They help to make driving a safe experience for those behind the wheel, safer for the passengers, and safer for the pedestrians who walk in and near traffic. If I agreed with the attitude of Paul in the verses that we just read through regarding Jewish law and applied it to driving, then that would be like saying that the reason the laws are given to limit one's speed in a school zone would be to teach drivers, since they will eventually speed and get a ticket, they are speeders. The purpose of the law of driving 20 miles an hour in a school zone is to teach the drivers that they're lawbreakers and they're speeders. According to Paul, all drivers are in need of forgiveness for breaking the law by driving faster than 20 miles per hour in a school zone, even before they get behind the wheel of a car. Why is there a law limiting one's speed when going through the school zone? Because it's easier and quicker to stop a car going 20 than it is to stop a car going 35. Furthermore, so that, God forbid, if one accidentally hits a student, the student is less likely to be hurt badly by a car going 20 miles per hour than if the student, God forbid, gets hit with a car going 35 or 55 or 100. The law of driving a car in a school zone by limiting the speed to 20 miles per hour is given for the sake of the driver and for the sake of the students. You don't obey the law limiting your speed because it pleases a judge, but because it's beneficial to the students and to the driver to obey the law. So often, Christians will say that Judaism is a religion of law, but Christianity is the religion of love. What they fail to realize is that while it is true that Judaism is a religion of law, totally true, the laws were given to us by God because God loves us. We in turn obey that law out of our love for God, and this is exactly what is meant by the passage from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 to 9, recited by Jews in almost every one of our religious services. Hear, O Israel, the Eternal is our God, the Eternal is one, and you shall love the Eternal your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. How do you show your love? Verse 6, and these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them for a sign upon your hand. They shall be for frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. The verses connect our love for God with obedience to God's commandments, and the obedience to God's laws help us live our lives to the fullest, just like the laws of driving makes for a better driving experience, as we explicitly are told in Leviticus 18, verse 4 to 5. My judgments shall you do, and my statutes shall you keep, to walk therein. I am the Eternal your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live in them, for I am the Eternal. Next one, number 4. Christians believe that Jews keep Jewish law in order to be justified, in order to go to heaven. What does it mean to be justified? We'll get to that in a minute. In the Christian's New Testament, Paul makes a comparison between one's faith and one's works or one's deeds. To Paul, that is the faith. It is the faith in Jesus as your personal Savior and remover of your guilt of sin that enables you to get to heaven. Since salvation from eternal damnation is Paul's main concern, Christianity's main concern, he believes that salvation is the main concern of Judaism, because he sees faith as the means to salvation from eternal damnation, and since Judaism is a religion of law, he believes that in Judaism, the obedience to Jewish law is our means to salvation. He doesn't have the slightest idea what he's talking about. Romans chapter 3, verse 20 to 24. Again, Romans chapter 3, 20 to 24. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Again, he thinks that we keep the law to be justified, but rather he is saying that the purpose of the law is so you know what sin is. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Even the righteousness of God, which is by faith in Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Also in Romans chapter 3, verse 28, therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. Or Galatians chapter 2, verse 16, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith in Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. These verses justify the most fundamental misunderstanding of Jewish law. Repeatedly, Paul writes that the law cannot justify those who follow them. What does it mean to Paul to be justified? It means to be forgiven for our sins, to be made righteous or without the guilt of our sin, which in turn enables us to go to heaven. So Paul writes that we keep Jewish law because it's keeping Jewish law that takes away our sin so that we are then able to get to heaven. Paul believed that the Jews keep Jewish law in order to be forgiven for our sins, enabling us to go to heaven. Paul believed that only one's faith in Jesus would enable them to go to heaven, since from his perspective, obedience to the law could not enable one to go to heaven. There is no place in the Torah or the TaNaCh, anywhere in the entire Bible, or in the Talmud, or in any other book of Judaism that indicates that the Jews at the time of Jesus, before or since, ever believed that we needed to keep the laws of God in order to be justified, in order to be forgiven for our sins, to be made righteous. We don't keep the laws of God to be made righteous or to remove our guilt for our sins. The Jews never obeyed God's laws in order to get into heaven. Keeping God's laws brings heaven into the here and now. Because we keep God's eternal laws, God's commandments, it brings God into our lives, the eternal God into our lives, and puts us in a direct relationship with God because we are obeying God. Christianity begins with the belief that all men are sinners, that they begin life with a taint of original sin, and therefore they begin life with guilt. Because Christianity believes in original sin, or they believe that our nature is sinful and we will sin as soon as we can choose our actions, then Christianity looks for a way to be forgiven or made righteous from the state of sinfulness that they think original sin brings. Christianity finds this way to be forgiven for original sin in the death of their Jesus. According to Judaism, our nature is not sinful. We already talked about this. And one does not become a sinner until you disobey the commandments, until one disobeys Jewish law. We are not born with any guilt for any sin. We do not obey God's laws to obtain forgiveness. I don't even need forgiveness until I disobey God's laws. The need for forgiveness is preceded by the disobedience and not the other way around. Because Judaism rejects the idea of original sin, as we've discussed, we have no need of Jesus or God's law to bring forgiveness. We need God's laws to enhance our lives, to give structure and discipline to our lives. How you obtain forgiveness for sins, disobeying God's laws, is discussed in a couple more chapters. So, back to my analogy of Jewish law and how it operates in Judaism. From the Jewish perspective, one does not obey the laws of driving to find forgiveness for speeding. You don't have to have forgiveness for speeding from a judge until you speed. You don't keep the laws to get forgiveness for speeding. According to the law, if one were to speed and get a ticket for speeding, it's the law itself that spells out how to get forgiven for speeding. Namely, pay the fine, take the defensive driving course. Whatever the law says, it's the law that tells you how to get forgiveness for speeding. One does not need forgiveness for speeding until you speed. Okay, number 5. Christians believe wrongly that the Jewish laws are too many for one person to obey and that no one person can obey every single law. According to Jewish tradition, if someone took every single law in the Torah, and as soon as they see, and God commanded, see something in the text that is a commandment of God to the Jews, and wrote it down, and took the next one, wrote it down, took the next one, wrote it down, and then they count up at the end, they would have 613 commandments according to Jewish tradition. Sounds like a lot of laws. Ooh, 613, that's so many laws. I would be willing to bet that there are more laws on the books of every single state in the United States than the mere 613 laws found in the Torah. And yet almost everyone who reads the book that we're talking about, my book, will never have served a day in jail, will never have been brought up on charges of breaking the laws of the city, county, or state in which they live. By and large, even though there are a lot more laws on the books of the state in which you live, most likely the vast majority of people watching this video have never been to jail. People forget that not every law in the Torah applies to every single person at every single moment of their lives, just as the laws on the books of the state in which you live do not apply to you every moment of your life. Using again the analogy of driving. If a person never drives an 18-wheeler truck, does that mean they are guilty of not fulfilling the laws of driving a truck? Should they be thrown in jail because they didn't fulfill the laws of driving a truck since they never got behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler? Of course not, because the laws of driving a truck, which will still be listed in the collection of every laws that any state has, they don't apply to somebody until they get behind the wheel of a truck. No different with God's laws. We are not expected to fulfill those laws, to do those laws, to obey those laws if they don't apply to us. I am not a Kohen. I am not a priest. But some of the 613 laws are all about the priesthood. So they don't apply to me because I'm not a priest. Some of those 613 laws apply only to males. For women, they don't have to obey them because they're not about women. I am not a woman. There are laws on the books that only apply to women. Therefore, part of the 613 laws, the ones that apply to women, don't apply to me. If you don't live in the land of Israel, part of the 613 laws are for those people who live in Israel. They're not a concern for those people who don't live in Israel. They don't apply. Truly, of the 613 laws found in the Torah, about half, some say less than half of it, but about half will apply to any one person at any one time in his or her life. Even 300 laws may seem like a lot, but there are far more laws on the books of the state in which you live than 613 laws. And yet, for some reason, you can keep those, can't you? Can a person totally be righteous in the eyes of God? Well, my Bible says they can. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. We see the same thing regarding Job. Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright and one that feared God and eschewed evil. So even the Bible believes that Jewish laws are doable. And this is expressly stated in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 to 14. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 to 14. For this commandment which I command you this day, it is not hidden from you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it to us that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very nigh unto you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. God is telling us that the law is very doable. Rhetorically, the passage above states that it's not hidden, it's not far away, it's not in heaven, it's not beyond the sea. It's already here with us that we may do it. God states that we can do it, a sentiment that is absent when Paul refers to this passage in Romans chapter 10, verse 6 through 9. Romans chapter 10, 6 through 9. But the righteousness which is of faith speaks on this way. Say not in your heart, who shall ascend into heaven? That is, bring Christ down from above. Christ? Where is it talking about Jesus? When it says to go, the law is not in heaven, that we should say, who will bring it down to us? It's not talking about Jesus. Verse 7, Romans 10, 7. Or who shall descend into the deep? That is, to bring up Christ again from the dead. Wait, what? It's not talking about dead people. It's talking about the ocean. But what says it? The word is nigh unto you, even in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith, which we preach. Excuse me, didn't he leave something out? The word is nigh unto you, even in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. Where's the line about we can do the law? Where is it? Why didn't he include that? Verse 9. That if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. Paul uses the passage from Deuteronomy chapter 30 as a means to preach that one must believe in Jesus because the law is not doable and has been superseded by faith in Jesus. To express this point, he leaves out the part of Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 14, where God states that you may do it. As I said, God would not give to anyone or to any group a set of laws that he knew could not be obeyed and then condemn them for not obeying them. That would make God a God of cruelty. Our God isn't cruel. Number 6, that to break any one Jewish law is the same as breaking any other law, and to break one law is to break all laws. Woo. Many Christians believe that to break even one law of God in the Bible is the same as breaking every law, which is exactly what is found in the book of James, chapter 2, verse 10. For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. Total nonsense. Never did God in our Bible ever equate all laws to each other. And you can see this quite simply because the punishment God gives out to those who break God's laws are not the same for every single law. One who steals did not receive the same penalty as one who commits first-degree premeditated cold-blooded murder, nor should they be the same. For murder, the Bible is clear. Exodus 21:12, he that smites a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. And for stealing, the Bible is equally clear. Exodus 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. He makes restitution. Since the punishment meted out by God is different for the two different kinds of transgressions, then in the eyes of God they are not the same, or they would have the same punishment for breaking them. And breaking one commandment is not as if one broke them all, or the punishment for every transgression, for every sin, would be the same, and that would have to mean the death penalty, which seems to be how Christianity understands this. Paul writes in Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. The wages of sin is not death. We die. And God created the world where from the very beginning death was an expected part of our existence. You should go back and listen to our discussion about chapter 4 of my book, or by my book. This idea that to break one law is to break every law is just ludicrous. And you can see when we apply this attitude towards Jewish law to the laws of driving a car. If you are driving and you come to a school zone and you slow down to 20 miles per hour or even less, then you go into the school zone, and then while you're in the school zone, you look down at your speedometer and see that you're going 23. Are you speeding? Yes, you're speeding. So to apply this Christian attitude towards Jewish law to the laws of driving a car would mean that if you're going 23 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour over the speed limit in a school zone, then you should get the death penalty. If to break one law is to break them all, if, as Paul wrote, the wages of sin are death, then one would get the death penalty for any transgression against any law, and so one would get the death penalty for going 23 in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone, as one would get the death penalty for cold-blooded murder. That's what Paul is saying. Read it for yourself. Don't believe me. Would a police officer give you a ticket for going 23 miles in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone? I think most likely the officer would not. Well, then who's more compassionate? Who is more merciful? Who is more understanding, a human police officer or God? If you think God is more compassionate, more merciful, more understanding, then God is ready to give faster than a human police officer. Thank you very much. Would a police officer be more likely to give you a ticket for going 23 in a school zone in August, September, school begins, or in May, June, when school ends? I believe God would be more likely to do so in August, September. I believe a police officer would be more likely to give you a ticket in August, September at the beginning of school because he wants you to develop the right habits early in the school year. To me, that's why God seems to be so much stricter in the biblical period than God is today. Does God really expect perfection from us like Christianity believes? God made us. God knows from the moment of our creation that we are not perfect creatures. God knows that we will try, but we're not always going to succeed. As a matter of fact, this is how God presents this in the Torah. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 3. Deuteronomy 6:3. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with you, and that you may increase mightily as the eternal God of your fathers has promised you in a land that flows with milk and honey. Did you notice that it says, observe to do it? The Hebrew reads, lishmor la'asot. Lishmor, to guard, to observe, la'asot, to do. Does a guarded hen house get robbed of its chickens? Yeah, sometimes it does. God knows we will try, but not always succeed, because we are not perfect creatures, which is how God made us to begin with. To try our best is what God wants. If we stumble, and we will, if the guarded house gets robbed, and it will, God still loves us and forgives us when we follow the law to obtain and earn forgiveness. And that's in the next chapter we cover, 2 chapters from now. What earns our forgiveness? As we will read in the 7th chapter of this book, if we fast, if we pray for forgiveness, if we start obeying and stop disobeying, God forgives us. In other words, our works, our deeds, obtain for us forgiveness for our sin. Not our faith, but what we actually do. While our faith may lead us to act, it's the actions that bring us God's forgiveness. How do we know what to do to earn God's forgiveness? Because the law itself tells us, just as the law itself tells us how to be forgiven for a speeding ticket, pay the fine, take the defensive driving class, and don't do it again. If one does speed again, then the punishment will not be so lax. This time one may have to pay a bigger fine or go to jail rather than just take a defensive driving class. On the other hand, as we read in services every day, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 13 to 21, it makes us sound as though to obey God's commandments ensures that all will always be well with us, while to transgress the laws of God ensures that all will go badly for us. And it shall come to pass, if you listen diligently to my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the eternal your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that I will give you the rain in your land in its due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your corn and your wine and your oil. And I will send grass in your fields for your cattle, that they may eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves that your heart is not deceived, and you don't turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. For then the Eternal's wrath will be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, and there'll be no rain, that the land yield not the fruit, her fruit, unless you perish quickly from off the good land from which the Eternal gives you. Therefore shall you lay up these words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that you may be and that they may be frontless between your eyes, and you shall teach them your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. And you shall write them upon the doorposts of your houses and upon your gates, that your days may be multiplied, the days of your children in the land which the Eternal swore to your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven upon earth. In other words, if you obey, all will be good, but if you disobey, all will be bad. Is that really how the world operates? Yeah, actually, I think it is. And we learn it from driving. You see, habits can kill. Habits can lead to death. Running a stop sign or drinking while driving or running a red light will not always kill you or kill others. But if you keep doing it, the bad habit will catch up to you. Good habits help you, and bad habits can hurt you. And of course, the obedience to God's will not ensure a perfectly good life, just as disobedience to God's laws will not ensure a horrible life. Bad things do happen to good people, and good things do happen to those who are bad. However, I believe the text is right, that overall one's life will be more likely to be better off if you obey, and one's life will be more likely to be worse if you don't. If a person is in the habit of not participating in faith and religion, then how can their faith be there for them when times get rough? And they will get rough. Religion is not running tap water where one wants it to be there when one needs it, but will not pay for the water and won't expend any effort to see to it that it's there when you get thirsty. Everybody wants to just be able to go up to a faucet, take what you want, drink, and leave. Religion isn't tap water. It requires us to have an ongoing relationship with God through our religion in order for it to be able to help us when we actually need it. Let's go back to the analogy of driving 23 in a school zone. If you were to drive into a school zone and see that you're speeding, would you then pull over and give yourself up to the police and expect the death penalty? Of course not, because the wages of speeding is not death. What you would do, and I suspect what you have already done in your life if you've ever driven a car, is that you would simply slow down and try not to speed again. And the same is true with God's laws, and it's the same with Jewish law. If I transgress God's laws, I don't give up. I don't become a pessimist. I don't hate myself or assume that it's simply the evil nature that I have to sin. I just try to do better. Judaism does not understand our occasional disobedience of God's laws as some statement about our nature, but rather is a statement about our ability to do both good and our ability to do bad, a constant choice that must be made between the two. Judaism does not emphasize the breaking of the law and our human capacity to sin, but Judaism rather is joyful at our ability to choose to obey and to try to obey, and joyful at our successes. Judaism further believes that God too is joyful at our successes. This more positive attitude towards God and towards humanity generates greater self-esteem than emphasizing the sinful nature of man and condemning God. It is therefore no wonder that Jews excel at so many things, since psychologists and studies show that high self-esteem is important to success. Another reaction one might have, if you accept the Christian attitude towards Jewish law, that to break one law is the same as to break them all, and that the punishment of death is deserved for any transgression. If I see I'm going 23 in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone, I will then realize I am breaking the law. But I might say, hey, I'm condemned already for going 23, then I may as well go 90 in the school zone. Why not? What's the difference? Since I can't keep the law perfectly, I may as well not keep them at all. And that leads us to the next Christian misunderstanding of Jewish law. The observance or obedience to Jewish law is not and has never been all or nothing proposition. Christianity seems to believe that for Jews, the obedience to God's law is all or nothing. Sadly, there are some Jews who believe the same thing, that the observance of Jewish law is either all or nothing. Some believe that since one must obey every Jewish law at all times, but they don't, either by choice or by accident, then one either doesn't have to obey any Jewish law at all. Perhaps assimilating the Christian attitude towards Jewish law, that to break one law is to break them all and that the penalty is the same for them all, many Jews may feel that if they cannot do everything and at all times, they therefore choose to do nothing, or they choose to violate the law to a much greater extent. Just because we're going to break Jewish law by going 23 does not give us permission to go 90. Let me explain what I mean by that. The mindset that believes that since one cannot keep kosher in a restaurant that is not certified kosher anyway, then one may as well have the bacon cheeseburger is like the person who sees that he's going 23 in a 20-mile-an-hour school zone, and so he speeds through the school zone at 90. What the person fails to understand is that if one is going to break the law, it's still better to break the law at the lesser level. As we said above, as I said before tonight, a human police officer most likely will not give somebody a ticket for going 23, and God is far more compassionate and merciful than a human police officer. Of course, the police officer and God would prefer you stay at 20 or below in a school zone, and God would much prefer that we observe carefully and completely all of God's laws, including the laws of keeping kosher. But as I said also above, the laws are not meant to condemn us. They are meant to make our lives better, and they were given to the Jewish people to make us better off. They were given for our sakes. We should observe these laws, at least to some extent, as best we can. We should choose only to go 23 if we're going to break the law at all, and not choose to go 90. There are different levels of the Jewish laws of keeping kosher. First, there's the biblical laws found in Leviticus 11 that tells us which animals can, in fact, be kosher. There we are commanded not to eat anything from a pig, not to eat anything in the waters unless it has both fins and scales. And it's this latter commandment that precludes eating shellfish of any kind. Then there's the rabbinic laws that determine how the kosher animal is to be killed, prepared, and served, derived from the Bible. It is the observance of all these laws that make the food we eat kosher. One's personal level of the observance of these laws of keeping kosher can vary on a very wide spectrum. One Orthodox rabbi may not eat the food of another Orthodox rabbi because the other rabbi's standard may be different than the first rabbi's standard, but they both, in fact, do keep kosher. A mashgiach, that's someone who sees to it that a restaurant or manufacturer maintains the laws of keeping kosher properly. However, the mashgiach for a restaurant may not, in fact, eat at that restaurant because his personal standards may be higher than the group for which he works, like the city's kosher certifying organization. It doesn't mean that the food at the restaurant isn't kosher. It just means that on his personal level, the level of that mashgiach, it's not kosher. He did, after all, certify the restaurant as kosher, but at the city's standards, not his own standards. Similarly, one can keep kosher even though it might be at a very low standard, but it is better to keep kosher at a lower standard than to not keep kosher at all. When I go to a non-kosher fast food restaurant, I have a choice. I can order a cheeseburger with bacon. I can order just the cheeseburger. I can order just a hamburger. I can order a fish sandwich, and I can order just a salad. Do I really have to eat the bacon cheeseburger? I can recognize that God has commanded me not to eat pig, and I can choose, in response to God, simply not to put the bacon on the cheeseburger. While it is true that the cheeseburger is combining dairy with meat, while it's true that the meat itself is not kosher killed beef, I am still responding to the commandment of God by refraining from eating the bacon on the sandwich. That means on the lowest possible level, to a small extent, low standard, I'm trying to keep kosher. Here's a Hasidic story that exemplifies what I'm trying to say. And this analogy I am talking about, like what you order when you go into a restaurant, I learned from a Hasidic rabbi. Once the disciples came to their rabbi, they were playing Stump the Rabbi and were trying to ask him a question to which there was no perfect answer. They asked him, Rabbi, there's a ladder, and the ladder has 613 rungs on it. There is someone near the top and someone near the bottom. The question, Rabbi, is who in the eyes of God is higher? Now, the rabbi knew that the obvious answer to this would be the person near the top, who being near the top of the 613 ladder, 613 rungs on the ladder, it means that he's observing nearly all the 613 commandments, even though we talked about that. But to say that the person near the top is higher in the eyes of God would be presumptuous and would deny the heights, no matter how low, achieved by the one near the bottom. This too might dissuade someone near the bottom from trying to climb even higher. On the other hand, the rabbi knew that to say the one near the bottom was higher in the eyes of God would be kind of ludicrous because of the heights obtained by the one near the top. So the rabbi said nothing. Thinking that they had their rabbi stumped, they asked him, Rabbi, what's the answer if there is one? He responded, there is an answer, but you have not told me the whole story. The disciples said to him, certainly we have. There's a ladder. It has 613 rungs. Someone's near the top. Someone's near the bottom. The question is, who in the eyes of God is higher? But the rabbi said to them, but you have not told me which of the two on the ladder is moving upwards. By making the choice for the cheeseburger rather than for the bacon cheeseburger, and saying, I will not eat the bacon on my cheeseburger because I am obeying God's commandment not to eat pig, you are placing yourself on the 613 rung ladder. Yep, you're near the bottom. Yep, your standards are low. Yep, you should increase your standards. But you have recognized that you have this ladder whose purpose, what's the purpose of the ladder? To elevate you and to bring you closer to God and to make your life more spiritual because you are in direct obedience to the God who commands you. Yep, you're still eating dairy and meat together. Yep, you're eating meat that is not kosher. But you are responding to the commandment of God by at least refraining from eating the bacon. So you could say at the lowest possible level, the lowest possible standard, you are keeping kosher. It's better to eat the cheeseburger than to eat the bacon cheeseburger. Absolutely. Especially if you're responding to God's commandments. Wouldn't it be better to just eat the hamburger and not the cheeseburger? Even though the meat is not kosher killed, you're still not eating with cheese. Yes, it's better because it's a higher level of keeping kosher than eating the cheeseburger. Is it better to not eat the hamburger, which is made from non-kosher beef, and to choose to eat a fish sandwich made of cod or whatever they're using it, whitefish, whatever the kosher fish is now? Answer is yes, it's better because, again, you are climbing the 613 ladder with each choice you make. Each Jewish law has its own merit. Each Jewish law has its own reward. And each Jewish law has its own effect on the person who's obeying it, who's observing it. There is merit in choosing to not eat the bacon, even if the cheeseburger mixes dairy and meat and the meat is not made of kosher beef. There is greater merit by not eating the bacon cheeseburger and also not eating the cheeseburger, because now you are observing two different Jewish laws. There is even greater merit by choosing to not eat the non-kosher meat and eating a fish sandwich of cod instead. Every Jewish law has its own reward and its own effect on the one who observes or obeys it. I have asked somebody what they do that is exclusively, distinctively Jewish, and why do they do it? Their answers could be categorized under 4 areas, and every single Jewish law will fall under one or more of these 4 categories. By the way, this is also described by Dennis Prager in the book he authored with Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism, The Intelligent Skeptic's Guide. I would strongly urge you to get the book. I think it's brilliant. The categories are determined by the motivation of the one observing Jewish law, and they are not actually a category of the law itself. The 4 categories are holiness, ethical, national, and reflexive. We call the first category holiness. This means that what motivates a person to observe that Jewish law is that the person feels connected to God. It's a response to the divine will and acknowledgement that God has commanded them. It's also an expression of making the act something that is spiritual. If one says they are keeping kosher to any extent because God commanded it, it means that every single time that person puts something in his or her mouth, he or she has to determine if it's kosher or not, and in keeping with what God demanded. It means that the person who keeps kosher for this reason, every time he or she eats, is reaffirming his or her relationship with God, and it brings God into his or her life every time he or she eats. The second category is called the ethical. It means that what motivates a person to observe this Jewish law is that it reminds the person to be an ethical person. Regarding keeping kosher, it means that he or she has chosen to keep kosher to whatever extent, because he or she recognizes that Judaism demands the ethical treatment of animals, that the slaughtering of animals in the Jewish way is the most humane, and this is a constant concern of Judaism. The third category is called the national. This means that what motivates a person to observe this Jewish law is that it connects the person to something else, to someone else, to another person, to the Jewish people, and to something that is greater than the person alone. Regarding keeping kosher, it means that he or she keeps kosher to connect to the people who were commanded by God to refrain from eating pig or shellfish. It means that the person who has chosen to keep kosher, at whatever level, is part of something greater than him or herself, and is connected to his or her 4,000-year-old history. The fourth category is called reflexive. This means that what motivates a person to observe this Jewish law is something that very directly affects the person observing it. Regarding keeping kosher, it means that the person has chosen for him or herself something that is a discipline regarding food. Look, psychology has shown us that those who are disciplined in one thing are a lot more likely to succeed at many things, while those who are disciplined at nothing are more likely to succeed at nothing. There is nothing harder to be disciplined in than in our eating habits. Anybody who's ever tried to lose weight knows this. By keeping kosher, even to a lesser extent, you are obtaining for yourself a discipline. As I wrote above, any one Jewish law will fall under one or more of these four categories. The more of the four categories that motivates a person to follow any Jewish law, the greater effect doing the law will have on their lives. If a person wants to sense the divine, if a person wants to bring God into his or her life, if a person wants to learn and practice the ethical, if a person wants to connect not only with God, but also with the people who are commanded by God, the Jewish people, if a person wants to do something that will make his or her life better for having done it, then that person should seriously think about increasing his or her level of observance of Jewish law. And if that person is not Jewish and they want this for their lives, I think they should consider conversion to Judaism. I gave this lecture once, and I was told by a woman after it was over that she felt I gave her ability again to light Shabbat candles. I said, what? Why? And she told me that when she stopped keeping kosher in her home, she felt her home was no longer completely Jewish, and she felt that made lighting the Shabbat candles a lie. She said the glow of the Shabbat candles on her kitchen table made her feel as though God and her faith permeated her home. When she stopped keeping a kosher home, all or nothing, she felt that glow was a lie, and therefore she stopped doing it. But after she heard me say what you just heard me say, and what I hope you will read in my book on the topic of the myth that Judaism is a faith that believes the observance of Jewish law is all or nothing, she felt that I gave her Shabbat candles back again, because it's not all or nothing. Every Jewish law has its own merit, its own reward, and its own effect. And the merit of lighting her Shabbat candles has nothing to do with the merit or effect or benefit of observing the Sabbath. They are not, one is not dependent upon the other. And I think we're going to stop there now.
Okay.
We only have a couple left, two left. You want to just real quickly finish it?
Yeah, go right ahead. That's fine.
Okay. Number 8, that Jewish law becomes obsolete if one person perfectly obeys or fulfills those laws. In the Christian New Testament, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 to 18, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law till everything shall be fulfilled. Many Christians believe that this means that since Jesus supposedly fulfilled the law by doing them perfectly, that the Jewish law given by God to the Jews through Moses have been made obsolete. This is absurd. Again, let me use the laws of driving a car to show why this is simply not correct. If you're driving behind another car and you both come to a stop sign and the car in front of you perfectly obeys the laws of stopping at a stop sign, would this mean that the laws of stopping at a stop sign have been fulfilled and no one ever needs to stop at a stop sign again? Obviously not. The reason is that the laws of driving were not created in order to teach people that they will eventually break the laws of driving and therefore in turn need the courts. The laws of driving were created to make the streets safer. They are for the benefit of the people and not to condemn them. For example, if a stoplight breaks, the law states that the intersection becomes like a four-way stop. All traffic in every direction must stop at the intersection, clear traffic, and then slowly pull forward through the intersection. This law makes driving safer and lets everybody know what is expected of them in this case. Jewish law isn't any different than that. And even if someone came along and obeyed every single law perfectly, even if it were God manifest in human form, which, by the way, is a pagan idea that we already discussed in our videos because it's chapter 2 in my book, the law would continue to be obeyed and would continue to help humanity as a result. Christianity believes the laws were given by God to prepare the Jews for the coming of Jesus. So when Jesus came and supposedly fulfilled the laws, they became obsolete. But since Jewish law was given by God to make the lives of those who follow them better off, the laws are eternal because God is eternal, because the benefit that comes from obeying God and God's laws will continue long after they are obeyed. God, who is eternal, made an eternal covenant with eternal laws with the eternal people of the people of Israel. It's that simple. Number 9, regarding the law and Christian misunderstanding of it, by punishing one person, another person's guilt for sins can be removed. This will be discussed more fully in the 6th chapter, the next chapter of the book. Let me deal with it briefly, again, with the analogy of the laws of driving a car. If I speed through a school zone and somebody dies, God forbid, can somebody else get the death penalty in my place or go to jail in my place? What if they volunteered to do so? Would the courts allow it? No, they would not allow it because everybody in their right mind knows that no one else can die for your sin. When you break the law, nobody else gets the punishment for your breaking the law. What if I was fined for my transgression? Let's say that I speeded through a school zone and I get a ticket. Could someone else pay the fine? They could provide the money. Someone else may give me the money to pay for the fine, but I'm the one who's taken before the judge. I'm the one who pleads guilty. I'm the one who has to pay the fine for my own guilt. Doesn't matter where I get the money from. The money becomes mine before I hand it over to the court, and the court sees it as my money. The whole concept of dying for someone else's sin is unbiblical, and we cover this in my book. So get the book and read it. Okay. That's the end of my chapter on Jewish law.
Cool. All right. Well, that was definitely a full, super, super packed one that was given.
I know it was a lot. People may have to watch this.
They will.
A few times, but they can because it's available. But they should also get my book.
Absolutely. And the book link is actually pinned in the top of the chat. But also, if you look in the video description area, you'll find it there below as well. And also go to Rabbi Federow's. There you go. I actually edited a photo that included both those on. I'll put that on the screen now. That shows both the Spanish and the English versions. And again, those are items number 3 and 4 in the video description area of my
oh, that's cool. I like
video.
that.
So cool. And then, yeah. And so I guess that's pretty much it then for tonight. And we'll see you, Hashem willing. Hey, there's, we need to do do we need a pre-record one day?
I'm sorry, what?
You and I will probably need to do a pre-recording on to cover me for, because I think on March the 13th, whatever Monday that is, I'm going to be leaving around noon to go to San Antonio for a couple days to spend time with my brother.
Good.
But I want to have a pre-recording set up so that we can go ahead and just program it to go live that night, so people don't miss out on their dose. And so that's been working out pretty good. So
Very doable.
We'll try to make that happen. So, but guys, thank you all for tuning in. It's a pleasure always, Rabbi, and we'll see you guys on the other side. Shalom, everybody. Peace. Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TANACHTALK.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה